that time again in the week. Woo woo.
I wasn't
we're
prepared.
live.
I wasn't prepared for any of that.
I know you weren't. Welcome back
I've
to Wednesday
quit.
Night, the journey. As we journey along, we are excited. Well, I am. I know.
Yeah, you're very
because we
excited.
are
it's
jumping
exciting.
in to probably the best book within the book of Romans.
Yeah,
Dun dun dun.
If you keep
Yay!
getting any more excited, I'm gonna have to put puppy pads underneath that chair.
But seriously, though, Romans is a great book. You know, we talked about Philemon last week, right? And how it showed the action of the gospel, right? It showed
Yeah.
it. So if that shows how the action of the gospel, Romans shows us and explains the gospel in depth. This is truly Paul's most systematic and comprehensive presentation of the gospel. He's taken everything he's taught before and everything he's going to be teaching later, even though he didn't know it, but everything he's taught before, and he's wrapped it up in a nice theological, comprehensive, systematic paper, basically.
Yeah. One of the advantages of this one is that all the other epistles were written to groups and churches and individuals that Paul already knew. So a lot of it was like taking someone's cell phone, looking through their messages, and trying to piece together what they were trying to say, because both parties already had intimate knowledge of each other. So there was holes in those epistles that don't really say or explain stuff because they were written to people that already knew. This one's different because it's written to an audience that he's never met. So he's introducing himself to these people in Rome, and we're basically getting message one that he sent to these people, and we have all the context, which is really, really interesting. Whenever you start unpacking all the other epistles that we've covered, we didn't have all the context.
Yeah. So the letter itself, it answers the foundational questions of our faith. It's what it does. So this is like, for me, a personal thing. If you couldn't get anything from any other lesson we've done or study we've done, this is the one that you really need to hone in and pay attention and hold on to your seat covers and just come along for the ride, because I'm telling you, you're going to get some really good stuff out of Romans. And it'll ask questions like, what is the gospel? It'll answer these questions. What is the gospel? Why do I need it? Why do we need it? Why do we need the gospel? How are we made right with God? What does salvation produce in everyday life? And then, of course, how should believers live in a divided world, right? So for us here in the Wednesday night, the journey, Romans is not just a theological study. It's a roadmap of salvation and transformation, right? Romans has shaped history. It has shaped history over the, 1,000-some-odd years, right? Almost 2,000 years, because it was written in 50-something AD, right? 57 AD, so almost 2,000 years.
Probably about 2,000 years, yeah.
It's influenced people like Augustine of Hippo, Martin Luther. Remember the thesis statements? Not Martin Luther Jr., but Martin Luther, John Wesley.
John Wesley, the
Right?
father of the Methodist Church.
So, and many, many other people, it's influenced these people in the way, like Martin Luther, for instance, Romans was the whole influence of his mindset and shift. And the reason why he put the thesis on the door is because he saw the corruption after he was isolated for a while and studying Romans. And God revealed things to him at that time, and that's why he did the thesis on the door, and went against the Catholic Church at that time.
I will say one of the more popular commentaries on Romans to read, especially if you're trying to get into church history, would be Martin Luther's commentary, and then John Calvin had one too.
Yep.
That a lot of actual denominations built off of those commentaries.
Yeah, and they were built, their commentaries on Romans, right? So it's a letter. This letter ignited revivals. It's reformed churches. It's transformed hearts.
created denominations.
Created denominations, and now it's what we're going to study. It's right before us. So this big impact. This book had such an impact on the church as we know it, and in the world, honestly, right? Because the Protestant church wouldn't have happened truly if Martin Luther didn't stand up and do what he did, and stand aside what he did. So you wouldn't have the Protestants. So we wouldn't be right here, honestly. So as we begin the Wednesday night study, remember, Romans is not merely to be studied, it's to be believed, it's to be experienced, it's to be lived. And Cindy said I needed to say this. Welcome to Romans, welcome to a deeper ground, and welcome to the journey.
She didn't say to read it like a weirdo, though.
That was good.
But it is. This is really what the Wednesday night is about, is the journey.
Yeah.
And this book here, you will see how we journey in life and how we get to this. And there's a couple diagrams we'll see, how we'll get from guilt to mission, really, is what it comes down to, So what do we have happening? Because I'm ready to get started.
We have a couple of things going on, actually, in the month of March alone. So we have a worship night going on the 20th. I believe it starts at 7 p.m., and it's going to be here. So invite a friend, come. They're amazing. And then on the 21st, Heart's Table has another cooking event. We're doing navy bean soup. I hear it's a famous soup. So I've never had it, but we're going to cook it.
I like this idea.
No, I hear it's
Never
a
had
good
it.
soup. I hear it's good.
Navy
Debbie
bean?
Dejan, navy bean.
Yeah, navy bean soup is good.
That's like 80% of the things that we cook at the house. I've never had it, but we're going to try.
So it's at 10 a.m. on the 21st. We need items, but I haven't put the list out yet. I'm waiting for the list. And the location is to be determined. It may be my house, but it's to be determined. And then the 28th, this is still, again, has not been put out officially, but it is in the works. On the 28th of March, we are going to do a ladies' breakfast out somewhere, probably closer towards the ocean front, but more to come on that. And then Easter's coming, so we'll need plenty of volunteers, donations. Please, I think Jessica Streeter's leading that, or Michelle Conway, one of them. But you can just reach out to someone, and they'll get you the information. But that's it.
All right. Let's open in prayer.
All right. Blessed be your name, O God, King of the universe, Lord. Thank you for this time and this opportunity to be together as a family and to worship you as our God, Lord. I pray that you give us that clear vision and that insight to go over this book while keeping it in context, Lord. I pray that we're able to peel back the onion and better understand this very, very theologically dense book and see how we can apply it to our lives in the modern time by learning how they applied it to their lives in the ancient time. I ask this all in your sweet precious name and pray. Amen and Maranatha.
Amen. All right, so remember, this is the beginning of Romans, so we're going to do the introduction. So this is really we're going to talk about the background story, the context, and where it all came from, basically. So it was written by Paul, the Apostle Paul, right? And more than likely, it was written around 57 AD during his third missionary journey while he was in Corinth. And you can go over to Acts 20 to cross-reference that. And unlike many of his other letters, Paul had not yet visited Rome when he wrote this epistle. He had not been there yet. This is a place that he just heard about, right? He's just had hearings. So, and that's important to understand because Romans is Paul's introduction letter. He's introducing himself, and more importantly, he's clearly presenting the gospel he preaches everywhere, right? So this is Paul saying, hi, my name is Paul, and let me tell you about the gospel, right?
No. And also keep in mind that the church that he's writing to was not young in any capacity. This was in 57, maybe 57, 58. I think the latest it possibly could be was 59, right? Well, the church itself was founded in 30 or 31. It was probably founded shortly after that Pentecost where Christ, Peter and the disciples, they preached to everybody in the tongues, right? That could be recognized and understood by all. There's a good chance that, those people heard, they came to Rome, and they were Jewish, and they started a very Jewish Christian church, more than likely inside of a house, and they still went to synagogue and things like that because that was part of their obligation.
Yep. So the church, it was located in Rome. The churches were located in Rome. And remember, Rome, at this time, it was the political and cultural center of the known world, right?
Everybody, this was the hub of the empire.
The who's who lived in Rome, right? So the Roman churches were likely began by what Damien just said, Jewish pilgrimages, right? So, and these Jewish pilgrims more than likely were present at the Pentecost over at Acts 2, right? And then they just returned home. So they were visiting Jerusalem, witnessed the Pentecost, and then returned home.
Yeah. And you got to remember, like, between that time from 30 to 45, Christianity was just a sect of Judaism. It was just another flavor of being Jewish for the most part. There were very, very few Gentile believers. That's because Paul is actively running around and building churches in the Gentile world. But the earliest days of Christianity, majority of them were Jewish. A lot of it was tied towards rabbinical knowledge because a lot of the foundations came from Christ, who was a rabbi, and Paul, who also is a rabbi, and then, all the disciples who were absolutely Jewish men, and there were also a lot of Jewish women that were starting churches as well. So it had a very Jewish identity up until...
Right, because they were also witnessing the Gentiles in the area, and they came to faith as well. So now you see the churches are become a mixed group of brought up Jewish Christians and Gentile Christians.
However, the power dynamic, especially in Rome, is the Jewish individuals were the actual leaders, and Gentiles were more or less on the pews. They were not going to be taking control or co-leading anything.
Right. So that tension existed. So there was a tension there. And that tension was between those Jewish believers who were focused on the law and their heritage, and then the Gentile believers who are grace-focused on freedom. Romans addresses that tension head on. Paul saw the issue of disunity, and remember, go back to Proverbs, and what is the one thing that God abhors is that disunity.
Division.
It's division, right? That disunity.
Amongst the brethren. Brethren.
So Paul, he hits this head on. And Paul explains there is one gospel, one righteousness, and one Lord. And we'll get to that as we see it, as we go through the scripture. So the purpose of the letter is Romans. We see multiple purposes, actually, right? So it's clearly to define the gospel. That's what Paul does. He clearly defines the gospel. Paul lays it out. He shows us the universality of sin, justification by faith, sanctification and new life, God's sovereignty and salvation, and practical Christian living, right? So, and it's also, the purpose was to unite the Jewish and Gentile believers, what we just mentioned, right? So Paul emphasized that all have sinned, all are justified the same way by grace through faith, and Abraham was justified before the law. Right?
Now, one of the reasons, though, can I bring up Claudius at this point?
We'll get into history in a minute.
Oh, okay, then never mind. That's why I asked.
We're getting to history in a minute.
That's the part I like.
Hold that thought. Hold that thought. Put a pin in it.
The pin is there.
Yeah. So the gospel levels the ground for the cross. That's what it does. That's what the gospel is. So, and then the third point that Paul brings up within Romans is to prepare for mission, right? So Paul expresses his desire to take the gospel to Spain, and we see that in Romans 15. Rome would serve as that launching point to take the gospel further.
Well, yeah, if you're trying to get into Europe at 57 AD, you're going through Rome.
Right. So Romans is a book, that is both theological and missional. So many people don't realize that. Many people don't see the dual nature of Romans.
There's also a lot of interesting pieces about Paul that are hidden in this letter too.
Mm-hmm. So our major themes within Romans is sin, number one. So every person stands guilty before a God, a holy God, for the holy God, before a holy God, the God, right? The justification is declared, we're all declared righteous, not by works, but by faith. You see grace, God's unearned favor toward undeserving sinners, right? You see sanctification is freedom from sin's power through union with Christ. We see sovereignty, God's redemptive plan across history, and we see transformation in 12. Doctrine always leads to duty, right? So all that up before 12, the transformation happens, right? And then you see the mission, right? And then actually, Lenny, if you can bring up that slide, the chart, the graph.
Chart, graph, slide, pictogram.
Nope, one back.
Hieroglyphics.
One back. There, this guy.
There we go.
Right? It's kind of like in your handout there. So we see what is defined. The book of Romans define, and that's through chapters 1 through 8, and it's righteousness revealed. It reveals the righteousness of God, right? So sin, then you're justified, you have justification, and then life is filled in the Spirit. So you have a union with Christ, and then life is filled with the Spirit.
So with the topic of righteousness, it was very important with addressing it to both audiences, because on one hand, you had the Jewish audience that had this very textbook understanding of righteousness, right? And it was basically Torah observance, observing the Torah and observing all the rituals, observing all the feasts, observing all of the tenets, the 613 commandments, right? And it was very mechanical. On the other end, with the Romans, Greeks, and Jews, the Romans and Greeks, their idea or the concept of righteousness was virtue, like being a good person, being virtuous, and you're either a good person or you're working on being a good person, because they had the belief that everybody's good, because everybody is humans in general are good. They just do bad things, and that was kind of boiled into their understanding. So their understanding of righteousness was way off the chain. So whenever we start unpacking kind of what was wrong with like that legalistic mindset, because there are great positives to that, but they had went too far, and they also, and Jesus had to correct a lot of that during his mission. And then the other half of that idea of, well, we're automatically righteous and we act righteously unless we don't, but otherwise we're virtuous people. He's trying to deal with both prongs of that fork.
Yeah. So 1 through 8, chapters 1 through 8 reveals that righteousness, right? And then 9 through 11, it defends that righteousness. So you see God's sovereignty. We see it in Israel, and then we see the mercy that we see, because we see Israel defying God's sovereignty. Not in a necessary like they defy God, but they just defy God's word. He defied him, right? So they turned their back on him is what they've done, right? Then you see 12 through 13, chapter 15, verses 13, that's righteousness applied. Once you figured out what righteousness is and how to defend it, now you figure out how to define it, right? And then we deploy it. So 15 through 16, it's proclaimed. So mission, partnership to all nations, right? So a little bit more detailed breakdown is like 1 through 3, we see the need for righteousness, right? So chapters 1 through 3 shows us the need for it. And 4 through 5 gives us the basis of the righteousness. Then 6 through 8 is the result of that righteousness. And then 9 through 11 is the scope of the righteousness. And then 12 through 16 is the practice. So it moves from doctrine to devotion is what it does. So we're learning doctrine. We're doing basic theological doctrine of what the gospel is. That's what Paul teaches us. And then it moves it to devotion. And then it moves it to mission, right? And that's the importance of the gospel, right?
Yeah.
You know, we say, what's the gospel? Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, right? That's what most people think. But the gospel is living those out, right? That's the gospel is the telling of Christ, his life, and who he is.
Your
right?
witness, really,
It's
and
your
how
witness.
God and Christ both have changed your life and how they have affected you and your understanding of what it means to be in his good graces,
Right.
as well as the hope of the resurrection. We get this so screwy. It's like, I hope I go to heaven. It's like, that's all you hope to? It was like,
Right. Yeah.
heaven is temporary. That's a temporary spot. You want the resurrection. You know, that's read more into Revelations. There's a whole resurrection. Heaven and hell give up the dead. Again, temporary. Our hope is the resurrection. Heaven's great, but it doesn't stop there.
Right. And what Romans is going to do for us, and many people, a lot of people get worried about that theological talk and doctrine talk, and it's really simple, right? Because what Romans will do, it's going to strengthen your foundation. It's going to strengthen your foundation of understanding the gospel, right? And then it's going to clarify salvation for you with precision, right? Not just clarify it and like, that's what it is. No, it's with precision, because Paul points it out in the first chapter. He points out sin and talks about sin in detail, right? And how it's sin of the heart and how it needs to be revealed in order to be what? Confessed.
Sorry.
Confessed, right? Confessed.
Zoned
and
out on
repented.
that
Yeah,
shiny part on your head.
and repented, right? And then what does it do? It equips us to articulate the gospel. Many of us are afraid to share the gospel because we don't understand what the gospel is. So we don't share our witness, and we're afraid to talk about it because we don't understand it, right? So this Romans gives us the strength. It strengthens up the foundation, it clarifies it for us, and then it equips us to articulate it, right? We've said what we like to do is we want to make sure that people are equipped to be able to defend the gospel, right? With their gospel.
I think a lot of people also have that apprehension because they've gone through denominations that train them to be high-pressure salesmen on the gospel.
Yeah.
And, knocking on doors and cold calls. And, like, they trained you to be a salesperson for Jesus. And it's so insincere.
Right.
And that's not
what Paul is saying.
what's in here in the Bible.
It's not what Paul is teaching.
Yeah.
Yeah. And Romans also shapes leadership maturity. He shapes us in spiritual maturity. And it calls the church to unity, which is huge. Because if you imagine if all the church is united finally, and we're like-minded, how much of a powerful force the church would be, period, right? And that's not just Calvary. I'm talking the church, the global church.
I mean,
right?
how many denominations that we know of that if you studied their beliefs, we're not so different, us and them, and really some of the differences are some of the dumbest things that we could sit there and actually argue over. And then we go and we study what? Thessalonians and Timothy, and they're talking about the dangers of arguing over the dumbest thing possible. Well, big news for you, Timmy. It creates a whole bunch of denominations and a whole bunch of people that can't agree with each other, and they're going to sit there on their side of the playpen and enjoy their version of Jesus and not get along with anybody else.
Yeah. So, and with all of that, what it does is my favorite chapter in the book.
The whole, it goes past that.
Right? It's chapter 12. It produces a transformed life. It produces transformed living. And that's really what we're trying to get to. We're trying to get to take all of it and put it in a practical step so you live it out loud, right? Do you live what you believe? That's the key. Right? And that's really what Paul's trying to say. And it's not light reading at all, but it's the bedrock to Christianity. We have to understand, right? This is the bedrock to Christianity, right?
Well, this is the only book that, again, gives you the full details because The audience was getting keyed in just like we're getting keyed in right now. They did not know Paul, so they didn't have all the foundations. So this book ends up becoming like the cornerstone of doxology. Doxology. And everything else that we know of for Christian theology really is built on that. And whenever we were studying a lot of the other epistles, we found ourselves going back to Romans because Romans does fill in the gaps on a lot of the things that are being said and not said in the other epistles. Because again, those audiences already had knowledge, so he's not going to explain stuff that they already know about. But here it's different because he doesn't know what the audience knows, so he ends up becoming very thorough because he doesn't know these people.
Right.
He doesn't know exactly what they're teaching. Whenever we study Acts and things like that, he came across a whole bunch of different individuals that had started churches, like the Ephesians. They had started a church, but in chapter 17, they were worshiping John the Baptist. And he had to get them on the lines. He'd never been to Rome. He doesn't know what they teach, so he goes very fundamental and builds up from that.
Right. So the big idea for this series of Romans is the righteousness of God is revealed in the gospel of Jesus Christ and transforms everyone who believes, right? So Romans is about the righteousness of God. And that righteousness is revealed in wrath, it's revealed in grace, it's revealed in justification, it's revealed in sanctification, it's revealed in mercy, and it's revealed in everyday obedience. It's about the righteousness of God, right? So as we're going through the studies, especially this first week here, think of these things. I'm going to give you 4 questions to just kind of write down or ponder or hold on to and think of. When you hear the word gospel, how would you define it? Why do you think Paul begins with the problem of sin? What does it mean to be justified? And how should deep theology change daily living? So there's just 4 thoughts that very, very simple questions, but very complex answers that we'll find out are very simple answers. Really, honestly, right? So let's dive into a little bit of historical and cultural context.
Finally!
So now we can bring up Claudius. But,
oh my gosh! I thought we'd never get to this point.
Right. But we're not Claudius quite yet.
He's going to go around the parking lot one more time.
We're going to start at Romans when it was written in 57 AD. So who reigned during that time? Emperor Nero was the emperor at that time. This was slightly before his severe persecution to the Christians began, okay?
Well, yeah, at this point, Nero's really, really young. I think he becomes emperor at 16.
Yeah.
And he's being led by Seneca the younger. He's a philosopher at the time, and Seneca doesn't have bad morals and ethics in general. He actually teaches pretty good stuff. He just has that screwy belief that virtue comes from within, and all of us are naturally good people. So just be a good person. You know, that is his attack on it. That is his answer to righteousness and the problem of evil. Is just don't do it. Stop it.
Mm-hmm. Right? Exactly.
Just stop it.
Yeah. Stop it.
So Nero's still very young. Claudius, his stepdad, because Claudius married his mom, he already had a kid, and he adopted the kid, and the kid was Nero, and Nero became the next in line from Claudius. But Claudius, he was very different.
Yeah, he was totally different. But before we get more into Claudius, let's look at what was happening at this time in Rome, right? So Rome, it was the capital of the empire. You had 1 million+ population. So there's lots of people living around there, right, or around in the empire of Rome. It controlled territories all the way from Britain to northern Africa. The emperor was worshipped, and that worship was increasing.
Yeah,
right?
Emperor worship and seeing the emperor as a god was like a really big thing for them. It goes back to like Pharaoh too. Pharaoh was a god.
Yep. Yeah, exactly.
He was the god of the Nile.
Yeah,
So anytime
exactly.
the Nile went and did bad things, the Pharaoh would get blamed.
Right. So loyalty to Caesar was very expected, right? So the Paul, he doesn't mention Nero by name. Romans 13, when we get to chapter 13, it makes far more sense when we remember believers were living under imperial power. That's the quote of give Caesar what Caesar is due almost, right?
Yeah. Give unto Caesar what is Caesar's, and give unto God
right.
what is God's.
Right. So Christians were a minority in this group, in this world. They were viewed very suspiciously. So they were,
Well,
kind of like how we look at Damien on a regular basis.
Well, and the thing is that, like, remember I told you how it starts, how our story starts out is like we're just another flavor of Judaism. But then whenever it starts really spreading to Gentiles, one, it becomes more popular with Gentiles. But the first earliest converts were your women and slaves, because Christianity promoted equality and freedom to anybody, regardless of who you are. And these are the most vulnerable people in the society, so this was a great place for them to be because they got accepted and were respected and regarded. So, but whenever you're the Roman Empire and you're seeing all these slaves and lessers getting together and pulling power and money and resources and things like that, that gets folks a little worried, and they're worried that these Christians are going to start slave revolts
Right.
and other different things. They're going to cause mischief.
They were considered socially disruptive.
And if you go back in time, like we're talking 57, 59 AD, if you go back in time before the Gentiles got involved, the Jewish Christians and the regular Jews, they had already started enough problems in Rome that Claudius had to get involved.
Right. So the Christians were sometimes associated with those Jewish unrests.
Yeah, because again, they were just another flavor of Judaism in 30 AD, all the way up to 46, 45 AD. So, of course, if you're going to blame the Jews, you're going to blame the Christians too.
Yeah. So Paul, he's writing to believers that are trying to live faithfully inside a pagan super powerhouse, right? It's so kind of sounds familiar a little bit, doesn't it? Right? Right? So let's back up a little bit further. Let's go back a little bit more in time. So the Jewish background we see, the Claudius expulsion. This is something back in 49 AD. So we're backing up. Remember, we were 57 AD, so we back up about 10 years, almost 10 years here, at 49 AD, right? So Emperor Claudius is in charge, right?
Yep.
And what does he do, Damien?
Well, and first off, Emperor Claudius is in charge, right? But also the Christian church in there is now almost 20 years old. So it's a more mature body of believers, a more mature congregation, and it's already established. It already has its rituals and things like that. Claudius gets involved because the Jewish believers, or the Jewish people who are practicing rabbinical Judaism, following the Pharisees, because the Pharisaical school hasn't fallen yet. That won't happen until 70 AD. Those people were fighting with the Christians because they were having debates over Christ and his legitimacy as Messiah. It got to such a fever pitch and caused so much disruption that Claudius got involved and just kicked every Jew out of Rome. So whenever he kicked all the Jews out of Rome, that church then, here it is, 49 AD, that church just instantly overnight became 100% Gentile and no leadership. Because all the Greeks and all the Romans, most of them were slaves, a lot of them were women, and none of them ran anything ever in their lives. And the folks that were running the church, they had just got thrown out. Very similar to Ezra and Nehemiah point. Whenever all the leaders of Israel or Judea were taken out of Babylon, it was just the poor and the broken that were left. Babylon was able to move in. They weren't able to stand, and they just became Babylonian. But in this case, that didn't happen. Whenever they pulled the Jews out, the Gentile believers actually got more fervent, and they actually became more established as a unique and individual thing, separate and distinct from Judaism, to the point that look at us now. We are extremely separated and distinct from any form of Judaism, to include Messianic Judaism, which follows Jesus just as much as we do.
Right. So then let's fast forward a little bit to 54 AD. Old Claudius dies, right? And this is where Nero, he's now the emperor, right? So, but Claudius dies, and what happens is the Jews were able to return.
So you know what? How I looked that up, and why that happened. It's like an executive order. It was an executive order, or an order under Claudius, that was only as good as Claudius, right? Nero would have had to taken that executive order and extended it. But he's a 16-year-old kid. He doesn't care about any of that. He wasn't even part of that beef at all. So he just doesn't acknowledge it. And that's how it gets reinstated. It just dies with Claudius.
There you go.
And then all the Jewish people that have been exposed, they start returning back. But at this point, the Christian church has been running without Jewish intervention for about 7 or 8 years now.
Yeah. So
with almost a decade at this point, they have really established a very separate and unique thing.
So you see that leadership shifted. You see worship styles, they've changed, right? You see law observances that were less emphasized. So you see, like, they weren't focused more on the laws of the Old Testament.
Well,
like,
yeah,
they kind of shrunk a little bit.
Well, you have to imagine, like, their understanding of Jewish laws is going to be very similar to our understanding of Jewish laws.
Some of us didn't know, and some of us
Some of us know them. Some of them make sense. A lot of them don't really apply to us. Whenever you start reading the laws very specifically, a lot of those laws are specific to living inside Israel, and they're like, baby, this is Rome. Like, I don't live over there. I live over here, and I'm a Gentile.
Right.
So a lot of debate, discussions, and arguments and heartache happened while those guys were gone, and they're like, well, we're not doing that, and we're not doing this, but these are the things that we are going to do.
So then the Jews came back. And now you can imagine what
hey, all
happened
that. Why
in the
are
church.
you doing all that?
Why aren't you doing this, or why aren't you doing that? So now you can see where the tension started to happening, and the disunity started happening within the Roman church.
Who's eating a bacon sandwich in church?
Yeah. So Paul wrote Romans, and he addresses that tension directly. He's addressing that directly. Paul explains the law's purpose within Romans. He explains Abraham's justification by faith, which is really good, right? And we're going to take a little trip back to Genesis on that when we study that a little bit. He explains God's ongoing plan for Israel, and you see that between 9 and 11, chapters 9 and 11, that ongoing plan for Israel. And you see the unity, he addresses that unity between Jew and Gentile, right? Which is huge, right? Because we're all grafted into the vine, and we're all one in Christ.
Yeah.
So without this historical moment, much of Romans 9 through 11 or 14 and 15, it's very abstract. So it's very important to have that. And with it, it becomes very deeply practical. So that's why Paul gives a good explanation within there. So we're going to really break that apart, and you're going to see some connections in this to the Old Testament and to the laws and to Abraham, and you're going to see those connections, and they're going to be, oh, aha! You're going to get some aha moments with it.
Oh yeah,
Trust me.
and you gotta also remember that this is Christianity before the temple was destroyed. So the flavor of Christianity with an active temple to God Himself existed, and their practices and their understandings were way different than what ours is, because we exist. Our Christianity has been a Christianity, one, very outside of Israel in the diaspora, and two, without any form of temple for centuries and centuries.
So the other point that you see we see a religious environment of Rome. So what we see happening within Rome is Rome was spiritually very pluralistic, meaning the city was filled with pagan temples, mystery religions. It had imperial cult worship. It had Greek philosophy. It had occult practices. I mean, Rome was just a hodgepodge of anything, your flavor. It was Burger King, have it your way, right away.
Well,
right?
and keep in mind that Rome is the blueprint of modern democracy and modern states, right? Because if you look around the Capitol and you start looking at the different structures and things, you will get a very Roman vibe. That was quite on purpose. Our founding fathers found great wisdom and lots of inspiration from the Roman Empire. The way they saw it is you could be whatever religion you want to be. You can worship whatever God you want to. As long as you pay your taxes and you don't cause an uproar, and I ain't got to go over there and bludgeon you and your family, by all means, carry on carrying on. That was the Roman way.
Right.
Win in Rome.
Right,
you know?
win in Rome, right?
Win in Rome.
But what you see within that is you see a morality reflected this mixture as well. So you see sexual immorality was normalized. You see slavery was very common. You see public brutality, gladiators entertain the crowds. You see social hierarchy dominating life, right? So Paul describes, when he's describing human depravity in Romans 1, he is not exaggerating. He is actually telling what he is actually seeing in the culture around them.
Well, you keep in mind the slave system that we discussed in Philemon, that fully existed in this world too.
100%.
Slaves are like 1/3, if not 2/3 of the population of Rome, and they're basically things that you could do whatever you want to with them as long as you own them. Mm-hmm. And that means you can kill them and give a good justified reason, anything. You know, that right there just by itself is enough to paint a moral and ethical picture whenever you have an entire class of people that are property.
Yep. So, but Paul, what he declares in Romans 1:16, and we have that one there, Lenny, is that it's the gospel is the power of God for salvation. It says, "For I am not ashamed of the gospel, because it is the power of God for salvation to everyone who believes, first to the Jew and also to the Greek." It's for everyone, everybody. It didn't matter. So that contrast, contrast was very intentional, right? He intentionally contrasted it, right? So Paul also writes this personal situation within the writing. He writes personal situation within the writing. He said, so when Paul writes the Romans, he has completed major missionary work in Asia Minor and Greece. We'll see that, right? We'll see. He is preparing to deliver a financial offering to Jerusalem. This is where Paul is at when he's writing this letter, his mindset and who he is. He hopes to travel west to Spain. We see that over in 15. And then he has never visited Rome, right? So he's writing all this out of reports and what he knows. So he's making sure they get the full story, right? So Romans serves as a very theological foundation. Again, can't repeat that enough, how important Romans is to the whole foundation of Christianity, because it's really Paul putting all of his eggs in one basket.
Well, you know,
right?
It's funny. Whenever you start looking at Acts, during this time, whenever the Jews were being thrown out of Rome, you know, Paul's still being Paul. He runs into Priscilla and Aquilus. They're the ones they were two people that had been thrown out of Rome. If they hadn't been thrown out, he would have never met them. They would have never founded their own churches, you know? But he would have gotten some insight maybe from them, what life was like in Rome and why they were on the run. So Paul's not working with a whole bunch of like current information about this area, especially if most of the Jewish people that he would be interacting with weren't allowed there, and a lot of the Gentiles that he interacted with were going to stay in their general location unless they had to go to Rome.
Right, exactly. So we also see it's a ministry introduction and a support letter for future mission, right? So Paul essentially is saying, here's the gospel. This is what I preach. Partner up with me. right? That's in essence what Paul is preaching here.
Yeah, one of the coolest things about this, and whenever we're going through there, I want you guys to really pay attention to this. This one more so than in the other epistles. He does the ask a question, answer the question. That's a lot of that in there. And this is very lawyer of Paul. Remember, Paul's basically a Supreme Court justice in his world. He was part of the Sadducees. He was one of the 70, court justices, highest judge that you could get in Jewish affairs. And he asks the question, answers it. He's framing this very meticulously to where you're left with very few options just within the logic and reasoning of his framing, because he's a lawyer.
Right. So let's look at the structure of the Roman church real quick. So the church, it didn't meet in these large buildings what we have now today, right? They met in houses, church houses, right? So likely multiple congregation existed across the city, right? So chapter 16 reveals a device membership to us. When we get to chapter 16, we'll see Jews and Gentiles, men and women, slave and free, wealthy patrons and working class believers. So it's all kind of a big hodgepodge of people, right? Not just one type of class, one type of person. And so the gospel was breaking those social barriers, which would have been huge in Rome, right? If you go back to the context. And even today, it's still kind of huge when we break those barriers. But it was very huge then, because especially when you start to look into slave and the free and the wealthy and the working class. Because if you were wealthy, you didn't rub elbows with the working class. You didn't rub elbows with the slaves. It just didn't happen. And most
You
of this
didn't
culture,
talk to women,
right? You didn't talk to women, right? And so these social barriers were just being broken down, and that's why Romans 12 through 15. 12 through 15.
There were other chapters after 12.
Emphasizes unity. It emphasizes humility, mutual love, bearing with the weak, submission to authorities, and loving enemies. That's why it's very important, because that puts it practically in place. It takes everything that he teaches, everything that he's teaching and framing 1 through 11. It shows that you need to take all that into consideration and now put it into use. Put it into practice. And that's what 12 through 15 emphasizes.
Those of you who are avid readers that are trying and not sticking to like a scheduled reading of the Bible, or have free time to do your scheduled reading and then also your own reading. Anybody who's doing your own reading, right? I strongly suggest reading the Sermon on the Mount in its entirety in either Matthew, Mark, or Luke. Pick one. Pick all three. Why not? And then start going through a study, just reading through Romans. You're going to see a lot of Paul pulling a lot from Christ, specifically these finer details, right? What he's doing is he's taking the Sermon on the Mount and he is being much more deliberate, much more detailed, but that's the framework. If you note the framework from Jesus himself in the only sermon he actually gives, that's recorded, and then look at Paul's letter, you're going to see so much parallel.
Yep. And what that is that doctrine is always meant to shape community, right? So that's what it is, because that's what Christ is speaking, is the doctrine of the gospel, of the law itself. He's of him, right? And then you see in Paul repeat that, and that's what it is. So why is righteousness its central theme? Why is righteousness the central theme of Romans? Why does Paul use righteousness as the central theme?
Well, righteousness was one of the most important concepts that you find in the Old Testament. Being found righteous was the pinnacle of being found obedient to God. Because that's really what it means. To be righteous is to be in right standing with God, as well as being charitable. Remember, tzedakah is a funny word. It means righteousness like this very metaphoric kind of thing that it's like freedom. You can't really just put your hands on it and define it as finite. But then charity is it's very concrete noun, because remember Hebrew nouns, they have like a metaphorical element to them and then a concrete element to them. So being on right standing with God, tzedakah is that one, but also charity and giving to the poor and taking care of those who are in need. That word does dual job in Hebrew, and it's like the pinnacle of what you're supposed to do and be.
Yeah, and what Paul is doing, he's introducing something very radically different in the culture, because the Roman world valued power, it valued honor, it valued status and citizenship and military strength. All those things were very highly valued in the Roman world, and now Paul is introducing something radically, totally different, the righteousness of God, right? It's not earned, it's not achieved, but it's revealed, right? So in the city itself, you see it's obsessed with dominance, but Paul preaches dependence.
Oh, remember
which is counterproductive.
Yeah, whenever we were covering Philemon, just general Roman friendships were always based on advantage, benefit, and what I can get from you and what I can give to you. That was their friendships. All of their relationships were really based on that honor and exchange. That's how that entire culture worked. Granted, our own culture really works like that too.
Yeah. So
like, there's very few people that you are friends with that are just there for your cute looks.
Right.
Oh, I know you. I know that to be true.
So you also see that the Rome was a city proud of their laws, right? They were very proud of their laws, their direction that they put. But Paul preaches grace, right? You see also within the city of Rome, it's that structure, that hierarchy, right? But Paul preaches unity at the foot of the cross. Everyone's equal.
Well, the concept of Roman rule is not grace, forgiveness, mercy, or anything. It's I'm going to break you on the wheel. I'm going to torture you until you either behave or you're no longer a problem for anyone.
Right. So then I'm going to point out just Romans 9 through 11 here, and it's historically, it is probably one of the most often debated theologically sections, right? But historically, they answer a pressing question. If the Jews were God's chosen people, why are so many rejecting the Messiah, right? That's a question. That's a debated question.
That is an
That's
extremely
a huge debated
good
question,
one.
right? But Paul explains that. He explains God's promises have not failed. And we're going to really dive into that deep when we get to those chapters right there, right? There is a remnant, and then you go back to the Old Testament for that.
You could go as far back as Moses.
Right. There's always going to be a remnant of a remnant, period. You can get those in the minor prophets. You see that 100%. Yeah. Gentiles, they're grafted into the vine, right? Christ teaches that. Right?
Yeah. And also the history of the children of God from Ben Israel, children of Israel, to Judeans, to what, Palestinians?
Yeah.
Judean, Palestine,
Judea.
The Roman territory of Palestine.
Yeah.
Throughout that entire history, the majority of these people laid on the laurels of, well, we were chosen by God, I can be completely terrible. Yep. It doesn't matter. And that was a good majority of them. And there was always that remnant of a remnant within those group that are like, being just born Jewish or born in a family is not enough.
Right.
You have to pursue righteousness, right living, right standing with God. Again, righteous living. And you see the failure in Genesis or in Bel Pelor in the beginning. Whenever they're out in the wilderness, you see the failure in Judges. You see the failure in Kings and Samuel. Every single historical moment that is defined in the Bible that covers the story of God's chosen people are a collection of people being absolutely horrible and absolutely treacherous to each other and God. And very few pockets of people within that much like Noah, who was the only person found righteous, there's your first remnant,
Right?
are found faithful and righteous, and those are the ones that carried the story down to the further next generation,
the next
and also carried the warnings of doom and things like that, and also were executed and martyred for it. Jesus, whenever you read through his woes to you, the Sadducees and teachers of the laws, you hypocrites, you say that if you were there during the time of Moses, you would never do these things. But I tell you that you are just like your fathers who killed the prophets. That is Jesus to them. He's like, you people are just as horrible as your ancestors, and you would kill the prophets like your dads did in their time today.
Yep.
Lo and behold, that was shortly before he would be crucified.
So, yet, still, Paul points out, Israel has a future in God's redemptive plan. He points this out. So, Romans, it's not abstract theology. Paul is writing a pastoral response to a visible division in the Roman church. That's what he's doing. This is what the tone of his letter is, right? So Romans is very bold. It's very bold. And it was a lot of risk to this letter that Paul wrote, really, honestly. He's declaring Jesus is Lord in Caesar's city, in the Roman Empire's city. Right? He's declaring Jesus is Lord. Salvation is not through the law. That's 2 points right there that are counterproductive to the whole Roman Empire, right? All humanity stands condemned apart from Christ. So he put everybody on the same playing field and the same level. So it's very bold, especially if you take it and when the context of the letter and who it's written to, right? And the time frame. And he also says faith alone justifies, which it's counterproductive to the Jewish belief at that point, right? They have to have faith, but they also believed in the law, and the law is what does it. So the faith within the law helped them be justified.
Yeah, and
So
a lot of the problems with the Jewish side had more to do with the intent than the action. Remember, Jesus always took the Pharisees to the woodshed. He didn't take too many other people to the woodshed. The Sadducees, he just made them look stupid, but he didn't take them to the woodshed. The Pharisees he did because they were the ones that were so close but so wrong. Everybody else was just wrong. Right. But the Pharisees were so close, but then just misstepped just because they didn't like him.
Right.
It was like, you're being dumb.
Right, exactly. So all the Romans, so Paul writing Romans here, it was very countercultural. It was potentially dangerous, right? It was like throwing a match in a powder keg, right? It was socially destabilizing, right? But yet we see Paul being totally unashamed of the gospel and writing this letter.
Yeah, well, he's also dealing with a very divided church too, and this is divided on racial lines.
So why does this context, as we close it up here, why does this context matter to us here on our Wednesday night study, right? So Romans becomes richer when we see that it was written to a divided church. It addressed political tension. It clarified Jewish and Gentile conflict. It prepared believers to live in a pagan empire. And it grounded mission in deep theology, right? Does that sound familiar to us? It's exactly what the church today does. It's exactly what the church today is. You know, you can just change a few little words up, but the whole overall picture is the exact same thing, right? Again, showing you that the Bible was written to them, but for us. It still applies today. It still helps us figure things out. So we also live in this pluralistic culture. Just walk out those doors and you know there's all kinds of different things out there, just like Rome. We live under constant political tension.
Yeah.
You know, just pick up Facebook, Instagram, CNN,
No, just
Fox,
put it
all of it.
down.
Just put it all.
We'll
You'll
put it
see
all
it. You'll see
down.
it. Churches are always facing division. I mean, that's why we have so many churches today, is because of division, because somebody didn't like something, and they took it out to another church.
Or they interpreted Romans one way and the other one interpreted it the other
Well,
way, and now you have two
I mean,
denominations.
I feel sorry for our brothers and sisters in the Methodist community because they had the biggest split in ever just a
What
few
was it,
years
2010?
ago. Yeah.
2010,
I mean,
the
they
Methodist
had
split
millions
in half.
of people walk away from the Methodist Church because of why? Differences in thought.
Well, yeah,
It's differences in thought.
a lot of it was the progressive
Yeah.
placating to
Yeah.
the modern culture instead of holding to Wesleyan principles.
Exactly. It's thought, modern thought. So, and in a world that's redefining morality, right? Exactly what we just talked
That's
about.
exactly what the problem
Right?
is.
So Romans is not outdated. It is very urgently needed today and relevant today, as
Yeah.
much more today than
I don't
we
think
ever thought.
I don't think Romans ever fell out of
No, it
being
never
relevant.
So understand that Romans is not just a theological textbook. It's not just a theology and that's it. It's a missionary letter that's written to cultural chaos and religious confusion and political tension and ethnic division. So it answers it's a simple answer, and it gives us a simple answer to all those, and that's the gospel. Paul gives us the gospel right here and there. This is what he explains. He explains it in detail, 1 through 8. Right? And then he gives a little background, 9 through 11, and then he tells us how to apply it to our lives and live it out practically in 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. Right? Got to point 12 each other. So got to get 12.
You got to get past 12.
12? No. You'll see.
There
You'll
is more.
see.
There's more to it than just 12.
But you'll see when we get to 12, you'll understand why I'm so.
That's going to be
adamant about
3
12.
days. I ain't even going to show up. Me and her are going to sit down. He's got like 5 volumes of notes. He's going to bring Chip Ingram here.
I would if I could.
That wouldn't be a bad thing.
I would. I could if I could. I would. He's a great. I recommend watching his R12 series.
Yeah.
100%.
No, it's a good one.
But there you go. So that's the introduction to Romans. You can see it's very big, and you can see the passion that we have behind it, and really wanting to make sure that you understand Romans before we walk away from anything else, because I think if you truly get Romans and then apply it, if you understand 1 through 11 and then learn how to apply it 12 through 15, I'm telling you, your eyes are going to be open wide, and you're going to live much more obedient to God.
Yeah, and keep in mind. Oh, sorry.
No, I was just going to say I was going to agree and say that I really think that try to make every week here to go through the whole thing, because just going through this whole introduction portion is encouraging, because we all need that to refresh our mind, renew our mind, as Romans says.
Renew our mind.
Renew our mind, sharpen that tool of the gospel, right? And then it also helps that this is in a church that is facing similar issues as we see today. It's encouraging, especially with everything going on right now. It's encouraging.
I will say that the biggest aha in reading Romans was whenever I found out who the audience was and why he was writing it. And just knowing what was going on then, it was easier to understand what was really pertinent and applicable to me now. And there's a lot of things that we've read and interpreted because we always just assumed that it was written to Gentiles. And a lot of those assumptions really make Paul say something different or something even opposite of what he actually meant to be, what he was actually saying. We've taken Paul and we've made him say what we want him to say. And a lot of these, especially in Rome, and that's kind of what the purpose of this class is, trying to undo some of that and keep Paul in Paul's context and read him as he intended to be read.
Yep, absolutely. It's all right. Let's read the Shema and pray.
All right. Listen, Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your strength. These words that I'm giving you today are to be in your heart. Repeat them to your children. Talk about them when you sit in your house, and when you walk along the road, when you lie down, and when you get up. Bind them as a sign on your hand, and let them be a symbol on your forehead. Write them on the doorposts of your house and on your city gates.
Blessed be your name, O God, King of this age, Lord. Thank you for your word, and thank you for this gathering, Lord. I pray that as we go through this series, that we're able to unpack and best explain Paul in the context of Paul and as you had intended him to be understood, Lord. I pray that we're able to provide these lessons without any of our predispositions and our assumptions, and that we could better understand this so that we could apply it to our lives and build our own faith in accordance to the way that we're supposed to in your kingdom. Be with us throughout the rest of this week. Be with those that are hurting, those that are in this church that are dealing with significant life issues, either health or otherwise, and may your presence be felt while they're going through those times, Lord. May they have you as their comforter. I ask this all in your sweet precious name I pray. Amen and Maranatha.
All right. See you all on the funny pages.